Welcome to Stump the Pastor. Our question today comes from Mark in Birmingham. And he asks, can a believer fall from grace? What does perseverance of the saints mean? What about eternal security? So these are all kind of related questions that Mark has. First of all, thanks, Mark, for this. Mark and I have had ongoing discussions about these questions, and I want all of you to know that I really appreciate when you send me questions that do reveal some kind of vulnerability. I know not all these questions are easy to ask, and I really work hard to find answers and take them seriously. So I just want you to know that. Like most of us who grew up in church, our individual faith is often shaped by the teaching of the congregation in which we were raised. So when we learn that some of our assumptions are not held by other Christians, and usually that's when we find ourselves, if not stumped, at least asking questions. So just so it's clear, questions are always good because they're indicators that grace is nudging us. So it's always okay to have questions. There's always also a limit to human knowledge and experience. None of us knows everything. So questions help us to push those limits back, at least a bit. Now, for those of you who did not grow up in Calvinist backgrounds, like typically denominations like Baptist, Lutheran, Presbyterians, those kinds of folks, the kinds of questions that Mark asks might not even have occurred to you. But the idea of eternal security is central for many Christians. And let's face it, as much as we talk about living by faith, most of us really have a need to know, don't we? I mean, faith is fine and good, but we really want to know. We really want to be sure. And I feel that same pull at times. Now, these doctrines about eternal security and the perseverance of the saints have emerged as the Christian church was developing and trying to figure out exactly what it meant to be a person of faith. Plus, people began to notice that there were behaviors sometimes in real human lives that caused some people to wonder if, like, bad behavior and Christian security were incompatible. But what it all comes down to, in the end, is whether something can ensure or prevent someone from going to heaven. And here's where I see the Achilles heel in these doctrinal assertions. Is the purpose for being a Christian certainty? I mean, isn't part of what it means to live by faith is that we don't know? That we have to let go of our need to control and allow ourselves to simply trust God's grace? So here's where I come down on these kinds of questions. And for those of you that know me, this is not a surprise. Heaven is not my concern. Now, I will confess, I love lots of the old gospel songs about a mansion over the hilltop. They are part of my own faith journey, and they still get my toe a-tapping. But here's the thing for me. Whatever happens at death is in God's hands. What it looks like, whether there are streets of gold, I don't care. I trust God's grace. Plus, for me now, the main purpose for being a Christian is about what I do with the blessings of life before I die. So my goal for being Christian isn't about going to heaven. My goal is making earth more heavenly for all of us. None of us knows what it's like to be dead. We can only trust God's grace, and frankly, I do. I mean, I have to, because there's nothing else I can do. No document I can sign, no statement of faith I might profess that makes sure my ticket is stamped to an afterlife. I trust God. And what I do with my life here and now is why I believe my faith is so important as an alternate narrative to the human inclination to want to control. See, the values that I see lived out in the life of Jesus and modeled in the experience of people of God for centuries is about loving the neighbor as oneself, caring for the hurting, attending to the vulnerable, welcoming the stranger, and so forth. Unfortunately, a great deal of harm Christians perpetuate upon our world seems to be based in locking in some perceived superiority that we think we have with God. And let's be honest, Christians have done some horrible things in the name of God. From violence towards non-Christians, to forced adherence to certain Christian law that our group defines, to perpetuation of ideas and assumptions that foster racism and homophobia and sexism. The arrogance of believing that one has security has often been the basis for these and other atrocious and atrocious actions. Now, I know that most people who want the security of heaven don't see it as getting a ticket stamped. There is a real desire to be in the presence of God and to know that that goes on forever. And being in the presence of God, well, that's my goal as well. These ideas are hard for some Christians to hear because they have become so ingrained in the faith traditions that formed many of us. Just remember this. Grace tickled your spirit from the moment you became aware of the world around you. Through every transition of your life, God's presence has urged you on, comforting you in your missteps, rejoicing with your moments of insight. Every person, thing, experience, and love you have known was an embodiment of Jesus in you. No document, no pastoral proclamation about your life makes any of that more real. Grace made it real. God was with you. Whatever happens next, just trust God. See you next time on Stump the Pastor. Well, there you go, Mark. I look forward to hearing more conversations around the subject. And if you've got something you've been pondering, send it to me. We'll talk about it on the next Stump the Pastor. See you then.